I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Deepin, simply because I find their desktop pretty limited, but I can't deny that what they create is pretty beautiful. So when they announced Deepin 23 with an improved desktop, their own packaging format for apps, cross-device sharing, and some local AI features, I thought it would be a good idea to make a video about it. And, well, that's the video you're watching now, and if you read the title, you know my feelings about everything that they shipped here. But I think it's still worth it to go into more detail about why I am so underwhelmed with Deepin. And it's also worth it to talk about today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Tuxcare. They're your all-in-one provider of solutions to ensure that your servers and workstations stay secure and up-to-date with minimal downtime through stuff like zero reboot kernel live patching, extended lifecycle support for Linux distros, commercial support for Alma Linux, and more. This week they're inviting you to a webinar on live patching, the easy-to-use cure for conventional Linux vulnerability patching, where you would typically apply your updates and restart your machines, which causes unnecessary downtime, end-user disruptions, and a heavy workload for IT staff. And we all know that all of this means that you generally will delay these updates for as long as you can. Now with live patching, on the other hand, teams can place all of this on autopilot and they can minimize downtime and disruptions and reclaim a lot of time for other more productive tasks. So this webinar will cover why conventional patching is such a drag on your organization, how live patching helps you cut costs and reduce vulnerability exposure, which solutions are available, and how to implement them. It will be on September the 4th, and of course the link is in the description. So let's go over the install and setup process first, because it's changed a little bit. So I decided to install Deepin on a spare laptop, and I got to see the usual vaguely English-like turns of phrase that I've grown accustomed to every time I try something Deepin related. It's still as charming as ever. The installer looks good, it's easy, it's fast, and next I got through the user setup, which let me pick from some of the most horrendous avatars I've ever seen, with that sort of Apple Memoji creepy plastic look mixed with a Funko Pop / chibi look. I settled on the horniest emoji I could find, and he's calling the number of the beast on his handphone for some reason. Pretty sure it's supposed to say 69 and not 666, but what do I know? I'm no Rizzler, as the kids say. Now once that was done, I ended up in a desktop with an intro video playing. It is unfortunately untranslated, and it makes use of a small mascot as the timestamp marker for some reason. I didn't quite understand what they showcased here, but I assumed it was about the core Deepin features, including a few interesting things like their AI stuff or text capture from images. Clicking next, I got to pick the desktop layout, either aligned to the center or the left, so more Windows 10 or more Windows 11 style. I got to pick whether I wanted visual effects or not, which doesn't actually disable animations, just the semi-translucency of some UI elements, and then I had a choice of icon themes, which also changes the wallpaper, the cursor theme, and the colors. The setup was thus completed, and I could immediately change the display scaling back to 1 instead of 1.25, because who would use 1.25 on a 1080p display? I don't know. And yes, I know I'm making fun of Deepin a little bit, but honestly it is very polished up to that point. And the little translation mistakes and untranslated video, they're only a problem if you run the Deepin installer on the Deepin distro. But if you use the Deepin desktop on another distribution, that's not that much of a problem. Now, since the last time I tried Deepin, things have changed a tiny bit. It's clearly looking more at Windows than macOS nowadays, with the taskbar at the bottom and the both styles you can pick from being basically either Windows 10 or Windows 11. You do have a few options like showing or hiding certain icons, changing opacity and rounded corners, or even the minimize effect, plus the size, alignment, and position of that taskbar. The main menu is still alright. You can maximize it to be an app grid, or you can minimize it to be an app menu. It has app search, it has the ability to sort applications by name, or now you can sort them by drag and drop in the list of applications. And in this freeform sorting mode, you can also right-click an application to place it to the top of the list. You also get a frequent and recently installed section in the menu. Also new is the workspace switcher in the bottom left, and the strip of virtual desktops in the app expose mode lets you remove desktops as well. I also quite liked the quick actions module at the bottom right of the taskbar. It's a very smartphone-like interface, but it's practical, and you can move some of these icons to the notification tray, which is nice. It also lets you screen record or cast your screen wirelessly, which is also pretty cool. And I know that for some people, something that looks like a tablet or smartphone interface is automatically childish and bad, but let's be honest, most people beginning their computing experiences today are starting on smartphones and tablets. Mimicking that is a good thing, not a bad one. In my opinion, saying that something has a tablet interface is actually a compliment in 2024. In terms of personalization, you have the usual suspects: dark and light mode, accent colors, some form of global themes that changes accent colors, wallpapers, and icons, or you can just change the icons and cursors individually, and also the fonts. It's definitely no KDE or no Cinnamon here, and these theme changes don't really apply uniformly to other apps still. KDE apps and Qt apps might pick up on some form of this Deepin theme, but it is badly broken with weird separators, cramped, close together menus, strange tabs, and incoherent icons. It's a giant mess. GNOME apps or GTK apps have a theme, not sure what it is, but it looks much better than Qt apps do under Deepin. Default apps on the Deepin desktop are still in that exact same ballpark of being basic and simple, but probably enough for anyone who just needs a computer for office work, email, and web browsing. The file manager has the few view modes that you need. It lets you single click or double click. It has a sidebar for item details, and enough options to make most people happy. The terminal is still nice and fine, but still doesn't support profiles. The App Store works well enough to install apps, but doesn't have any repo management tools that I could find, and it has a few untranslated parts. The calendar works fine locally, but still doesn't support any form of online calendar apart from using a Deepin ID. It's all fine, but it really hasn't progressed at all since the last time I looked at Deepin in 2022. The apps are basically unchanged, and you still don't have any form of online connectivity for something very basic like CardDAV or CalDAV, which really sucks. Now, this is fine for people doing local work on one single computer, and I really thought that this was the target for Deepin, but the features that they're starting to add to the distro really make me feel that they don't really know who their target audience is. Finally, judging from OBS's options to capture the screen, from the fact that I have to log out to change display scaling, and also from the fact that it's clearly stated in the settings, Deepin is still stuck on X11. This means poor touchpad gestures that only trigger after you've completed them, instead of moving elements as you move your fingers, like what GNOME or KDE have. It means no HDR support, not even experimental. It means no per monitor scaling. It means a fundamentally insecure desktop, as any app can keylog what you type in the entire system. Now, if only for security reasons, X11 needs to die. It has no way of preventing any application from reading every single key press that you're doing in any other application. Wayland is the future, there is no two ways about it, and not having even an experimental session that people can play around with in 2024 is not really acceptable. Deepin said in their betas that they were working on Wayland support, but the fact that they don't even offer the option to test it right now means that it's probably really far from ready, and that's not very encouraging for the future. Now, finally, Deepin added an application that lets you share a bunch of things between computers, including your clipboard, transferring files, or sharing your mouse cursor between devices. Unfortunately, this system only works between computers running Deepin or between Deepin and Windows, and I only have one computer running Deepin and none running Windows, for now. Now this means I cannot test how this works, and those limitations are absolutely baffling to me because these are things that on X11 are really easy to do, are already done with plenty of other apps like Barrier, like Warpinator, like KDE Connect for all of these feature sets, so limiting this to deep-in computing or deep into Windows makes zero sense. Seriously, you don't even have the Wayland excuse here, you're still on X11, and those features exist on other apps that work on any Linux distro, so what's going on here? Now, what sets Deepin apart from other distros and desktops is their touted integration of AI features in the desktop itself. On Linux, this is really a first, and I do hope it will be a last. First is what they called UOS AI. Its icon is present by default in the system tray. It's basically just a gateway for you to have the various AI tools that you use inside your OS. It doesn't come with a local model, a pre-built link to any AI Deepin might have. You do need to enter an API key for any of the supported models, like GPT 3.5, GPT-4, and a few others that only have Chinese names that I cannot read. I tried creating an OpenAI API key and using it here, but it didn't work. It told me I exceeded my current quota. This obviously indicates that I have to pay OpenAI to make that thing work, and I have zero intention of giving that company a single cent in my entire life. Deepin also has the ability to build your own personal knowledge assistant, but surprise, it depends on the same models that you have to configure, and it doesn't come with anything local either, so I couldn't make it work. Now, in theory, here you just add your own research papers and documents and knowledge base into this AI system, and the answers it gives you are based on that specific knowledge, meaning you don't have to parse 300 pages long PDFs to write your thesis. You can just ask a specific question to your assistant and it's going to find the answer for you, just like Google would. But it's still interesting in theory, but if you have to configure an API key and buy a service from another provider and configure that in a menu, it defeats the purpose. And don't tell me a local model would be too heavy or impossible, because I have a GNOME app installed on my system that does it on my own laptop. It's called Alpaca, it has tons of models to choose from, and it works really well, even though sure it is not extremely fast. For this kind of purpose, with your very own documents, this would work fine. There are plenty of small models capable of handling that reasonably fast on regular hardware. And unfortunately, the same issue is also there for the last feature, which is the Deepin System Assistant, an AI-powered tool that lets you ask questions about how your system works. This also requires an account with another AI provider, so it is basically non-functional out of the box, which is a shame, because that's one of the best use cases for AI assistants, answering questions about how to configure and tweak your system. Which, here again, would have been perfectly doable with a local model running on device. It is not that resource intensive to parse questions from the Deepin system manual. And I am not against the addition of a system-level interface that lets you interact with various AI models. If you want conversational AI, then sure, asking for an API key for a specific model is fine. But for built-in system features like the Deepin System Assistant or your own personal knowledge assistant, you basically shipped nothing here. You shipped an interface that plugs into something someone else did. And this interface serves no purpose if someone already has to know how to generate an API key, because in that case, they know how to use GPT-4, 3.5 or whatever other model, and they'll just use that instead of your own interface. So who are these features for if you don't ship your own local models, or you don't have your own service running in the background that your thing connects to automatically? You can put quotas, you can sell access to it, you can hide it behind a Deepin ID, but here everything you've done is virtually useless because the expected target will never create an API key for any of this, and those who could create API keys already use these things on their browser and they don't need a system-wide interface because that's gonna be less efficient for them. Now, another thing introduced in Deepin 23 is what they call Liniapps. This is a new packaging format specific to Deepin, and they started using that format for some of their own applications that are pre-installed. It's another sandboxed format like snaps or flatpaks where you build your app once for each architecture and you don't need to build it for each distro and each distro's version. They have their own section in the App Store with a bunch of apps already, although a lot of these seem to be Chinese apps that have untranslated names. There are some familiar icons here like GVim, Eclipse, Xmind, and a bunch of others. Now, trying to download one of these apps didn't work immediately. The download window stayed stuck and it took a while, it failed, and then it finally installed fine after retrying the thing multiple times. I would assume this is because the repo for LineApps is in China, because Deepin is a Chinese distro, and maybe just the distance and the connection makes it unreliable, or maybe they are looking at who is downloading what from where. Not sure, but yeah, it didn't work quite well. Now, after retrying that a few times, applications did install and they worked fine. Finding technical documentation about LineApps, or as they were called previously, Linglong, is really difficult though, at least documentation in English. Okay, I was sort of unsatisfied with my commentary on Linglong here while I was editing the video, so I dug a bit deeper, I spent a few hours, and what I found is only stuff that Deepin talks about, but the difference between Linglong and Flatpak seems to be that basically Linglong doesn't really allow any form of runtime to exist. Well, not every single form of runtime. They use what they call a non-full runtime, meaning that they do have a runtime that is shared between Linglong apps, but they also rely on some host system libraries on top of that. So it's sort of a hybrid between like regular old Debian packages where you have shared libraries and then a runtime that you can update at your leisure without having to break the system libraries. Meaning that in the end, you can share some libraries that have been loaded in memory, meaning that it looks like Linglong apps actually start faster than most Flatpak apps that Deepin tested, which means I can't really confirm that, but they're saying it is faster and they have a chart to prove it, and it is also much faster than app images and snaps in the process. So, in the end, Deepin 23 was really underwhelming. I went into it pretty excited, seeing that they had continued their polishing work, that the system seemed to have gained more customization options, nicely integrated AI tools, at least on paper, plus some interesting changes. The issue is, Deepin didn't really deliver on any of that, and they don't really seem to know who they're aiming for, really. On the one hand, you have a simple, nice-looking, competent desktop that could appeal to any regular PC user. I would go as far as saying that it looks nicer than any other desktop we have on Linux, and nicer than Windows and macOS. But taste is subjective. What isn't subjective is how half-baked everything here felt. If you want to bring AI assistants to the masses, you can't ask them to have their own paid account for ChatGPT or a Chinese AI provider. Or if you do, you need to guide them to buy that account and ask them to log in to that account, not to use an API key. In their current state, these AI features serve no one well. Experienced AI users who pay for AI services and could generate those keys will use these from the providers themselves. Inexperienced users who need the system assistant and would like the personal knowledge assistant, they won't bother with generating that key. They'll take one look at the AI account window and they will decide they don't want it. Which is fair. Not wanting AI is a green flag, actually. Now, the LineApps packaging formats, it could be interesting. It could even be better than Flatpak or Snap. From where I'm standing, it looks like it's structured like a Flatpak fork, and it doesn't seem to bring anything new, but again, since the documentation is virtually untranslated and incomplete, I can't tell. All in all, I am disappointed. There are good ideas here, but the desktop has not progressed a lot, if at all, since I last looked at Deepin in 2022. I actually rewatched my old video from back then just to make sure, and yes, nothing really changed. The only new additions are simply unfinished, or at least they missed the mark of being user-friendly. On top of that, Deepin is lagging behind on the Wayland front now. I think what Deepin has delivered in 2024 It could have been cool, it was exciting on paper, but everything here needs a lot more time in the oven before it's ready to be used by anyone. Now, if you just enjoy the Deepin desktop, the very few updates applied here will probably satisfy you on another distro, but I see zero reason to use Deepin as a distro right now. The AI thing was exciting when I looked at it, but it's just not finished. What never disappoints though is our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. You know about them by now, they make laptops and desktops that run with Linux out of the box. All the hardware has been picked specifically because it runs well with Linux, they contribute patches upstream to make sure that stuff runs well, and they have tons of options for various device form factors, various options for each device, various keyboard layouts. I only use their computers these days, my entire channel is run from one of their laptops, my entire gaming needs are served from one of their desktops, and I could not be happier. So if you need a new computer, you want to run Linux on it, you want to support a company that actively develops stuff for Linux, you have a link in the description as always. Anyway, thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. All the usual YouTube pleasantries are always appreciated. There are links in the description to support the channel and gain some new perks. And I guess that's it. So, see you in the next one. Bye!